Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hello and welcome everybody. My name's Dan DeFore, and this is going to be my non-spoiler review for Matt Reeves' The Batman. Originally, I wanted to do one giant review and get all my thoughts down in one place, but long story short, I became a victim of my own verbosity, and now it's 3 parts. So look forward to the spoiler review where I'm going to get into the more nitty-gritty details of the filmmaking, the elements of filmmaking that I think supported the narrative in this film really well. And also be sure to check out the Batman case report video that I just did, which is actually supposed to be the introduction to all of this, but kind of grew into its own thing. But I think it ended up being pretty cool. Other than that, with nothing further to do, let's get straight to the review. Enjoy. Plagued by shooting delays, actor swaps, as well as being the third relaunch of a franchise inside of 20 years, I mean, what's a poor billionaire playboy to do? Well, as it turns out, throw the gnarliest temper tantrum a city has ever seen. I jest, but in a sense, it's kind of what this film is about. It's a much younger, much angrier Bruce than we've been used to seeing on the silver screen, and as such, he's not as suave, smooth, or polished in many of the ways we often expect of his future self. He is in a lot of ways what I would expect someone might be like who's suffered a tragic loss at a young age, then allowed to indulge that pain with seemingly endless funding and the status to silence any authority figures he may encounter throughout his adolescence. Almost like a Hollywood child actor. And this brings me to the first point I'd like to make about both the film and its detractors. Probably the biggest criticism I've heard about the film is that it's too long. And the quick and easy rebuttal is that it didn't bother either the people I saw it with or myself. In fact, I enjoyed it more the second viewing, and that honestly caught me off guard. However, I'd like to make a deeper point about the runtime and how it plays into the storytelling. After all, the telling of a story is not just about the words on the page, but how they are delivered. Look at any great orator in history as an example. Just as with any great speech, the pace of a film can be as much of a character or narrative tool as any other aspect of storytelling, visual or otherwise. Referring to the cinematography and score, let's say. So how do you tell the story of a psychotically methodical detective pitted against an intellectual foil that may prove too clever to be captured? How do you give the audience a sensation of trying to race through quicksand, desperate to find a way out, but knowing every move and mistake carries with it sometimes unproportional consequences? Well, one suggestion might be to somewhat subvert a tried and true storytelling device, the countdown clock. Yes, the very same that is attached to every time bomb come doomsday device seen employed by countless action movies. A great way to create drama instantaneously is to show the audience a big clock with some dire consequence attached to its countdown. Now, while this is often called out as lazy writing, I believe it's more a case of just a lazy writer. Although the countdown clock is often used as a form of deus ex machina, the underlying dramatic principles upon which it operates are fairly fundamental. Hence, the effective use of a countdown clock comes down to how a storyteller applies those principles in their particular work, just as how exposition gets delivered to the audience is often a marker of the author/director's storytelling prowess. This is why I believe the film needs the slower pace and, as a result, the longer runtime, to feel the weight of Bruce's mistakes. This is a brutal film in many ways, including to its very own protagonist, and for us to understand the consequences of these mistakes, to feel true redemption for our hero in the end, we must take the journey with Bruce as he fights his way to his own enlightenment, through wave after wave of goons and gangsters, frauds and femme fatales, corrupt cops, and even decapitation by detonation. However, I find I must admit that I do agree with many critics in that the third act does falter quite a bit, shifting gears fairly severely from the first 2/3 of the film, and although I will later get into why I appreciate the ending and what it was trying to do on a technical storytelling level, I'm not certain it quite sticks to landing, to use the vernacular. Although I greatly appreciate subtleties in storytelling, I think this film's heavy reliance on subtext to fill in a backstory and character development fails to support the bombastic kind of finale that is Hollywood dictate. Likewise, to those who would say Batman isn't supposed to be seen in the public and, man, this guy kind of gets handed a lot of info by side characters for a detective, to respond to them, I would say, you're right. This is not very Batman. However, I think the film is both subtle and not so subtle in telling us this is not yet the Batman. He's not even referred to as Batman in the film. Almost everyone who addresses him in costume calls him Vengeance. More on the significance of this in the spoiler section. In fact, the only time I saw a proper Batman reference was in a newspaper headline plastered on the wall in the Riddler's apartment, while the camera dollies past, not even focused on it. And Batman only refers to himself as such one time, and it's in a reference to potentially hanging up the cape and cowl. one of those sparing lines of dialogue that act like a connecting dot, a small point of reference in the larger portrait of this character. Speaking of character development, this film is an absolute study in it, particularly with the way the characters engage with the action and the fights of the story, the details and the set design and the lighting, and the soundtrack and the score that everyone seems to be loving, and even down to how the characters walk and move through the locations, how they choose to approach their given situations and circumstances. All of these things tell us something about who these characters are, and this film knows this and respects it to a level of detail I can't quite seem to recall seeing in any other films. I'd also like to quickly point out how many subtle nods there are to not only the comics, but to many past iterations of the character, sewn near seamlessly into the narrative and set design, such as Bruce's voiceover as he reads the nightly notes in the beginning of the film, acting as a bit of a stand-in for the ever-present inner monologue Batman writers often use to convey important exposition to readers. Used just enough to tell you what you need to know about your protagonist without calling attention to itself as a tried-and-true genre trope of film noir. Now, as a last note, I'd like to say that they definitely leave things open for sequels, which is the standard. But in my humble opinion, it was done quite tastefully and in a manner that naturally leaves this world open for more exploration. This film tells the story it set out to tell, and it ends when that story ends, the characters all learning their respective moral lessons, but all with eyes on the horizon of their own personal paths that they follow towards the adventures to come. So if you haven't seen the film yet, stop listening now and go watch it. Then come back and we can explore a little bit more of the crime-soaked streets of Matt Reeves' Gotham. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on my thoughts on the Batman.
It sound right, boys.